What happened to Kurt Sova? The teen's death is still a mystery more than 40 years later. Was it a murder or an accident?
Did he die because he made a bad mistake? Was he killed? I think people come up with crazy theories all the time.
Kurt grew up in Cleveland, athletic, artistic, with his whole life ahead of him. At just 17, he went to a party one night and went missing, eventually found dead days later. I'm Sara Goldenberg, and you're listening to Dark Side of the Land. I'm going to take you inside the case of Kurt Sova, a case full of twists and turns and unanswered questions, a case eventually reopened and pored over by hundreds of citizen detectives. What will it take to crack this cold case? Kurt Sova was Kevin's baby brother.
Kurt was a good kid. Kurt was a comedian, sports-oriented. He was very artistic.
He was the youngest of 4 boys. Their names all started with K: Kevin, Kenny, Keith, and Kurt. Kurt loved playing football and fishing, and he had a lot of friends.
Kurt was fun-loving, very funny. He was just a good kid.
Kurt wore his hair long, parted down the middle. He had brown eyes and a big smile. Kevin says they were still settling into their new home after moving from one part of Cleveland to another. They grew up fast in a rough neighborhood, brothers learning to stick up for each other.
It was kind of hard because we came from a neighborhood that changed quickly. And we moved down into Slavic Village in 1975.
Slavic Village is a working-class neighborhood on the city's southeast side. It was named for the Czech and Polish immigrants that settled here. And even today, it still has an industrial feel to it, just miles away from the city's steel mills. Houses sit closely next to each other on tree-lined streets. One fall day in 1981, Kurt made plans to go out for the night with friends. Kevin still questions what brought him to a party in Newburgh Heights, a small village across the highway, since they didn't usually leave their neighborhood. He said this wasn't their turf.
He would have headed straight up Harvard. He wouldn't have walked through this. This was unfamiliar terrain. We didn't hang out down here, so he didn't know it.
It was October 23rd, 1981. What happened that Friday night is still a mystery. Kurt was invited to a Halloween party. Kevin told me it was his favorite time of the year, but he didn't come home that night. His parents searched for him the next day, and their worries grew. This wasn't like him. They reported him missing to police on Sunday. Kevin says his mom, Dorothy, found out about the party where he was last seen, and she went to the house to find out more. It's a nondescript white duplex sitting right off a busy main road in Newburgh Heights. According to Unsolved Mysteries, an iconic show that Kurt's case would later be featured on, the woman who lived there denied she had a party, and she said she never saw Kurt. But Dorothy didn't give up and called the woman again until she admitted there had been a party. And yes, Kurt was there drinking hard alcohol. A friend of his later told police he took Kurt outside for some fresh air, and he was drunk. This friend went back inside to get Kurt's jacket, and when he came back, Kurt was gone. Kurt's family thought something was really off.
And by Sunday, it was pretty serious around the house that there was something wrong. Didn't know what, but we knew something was wrong.
They started searching for Kurt. Days went by.
And now, utter fear was set in. Nobody saw him. Nobody knew where he was.
And then the call no family wants to get.
Wednesday, probably early evening, is when we got the call that 3 kids found Kurt's body. And I just remember that for a couple of days thinking it was a dream. It didn't make sense. How could the kid go to a party and now he's dead? You figure he might have drank too much like most kids, might have been sick, might have had a hangover, but you never thought he would turn up dead.
On October 28, 1981, Kurt's body was found in a ravine 5 days after he went missing, just 500 yards away from the party house on Harvard Ave off a busy industrial back road. Back then and today, truckers drive a bumpy road in and out to get to a waste and recycling center. It's not a remote area. It's pretty well traveled, full of tall grass and weeds and sitting below a steep drop with houses hidden by the woods up above. Kurt was lying face up in what investigators called a small pond, more like a large puddle of water. His arms were stretched out and he was missing a shoe.
Our worst possible fear, nightmare, happened. They found Kurt dead, and life was never the same.
Where Kurt was found was just over a mile from his own family's house. This day still haunts Kevin, now in his early 60s.
Did he die here? Was he placed here?
This is where Kevin and I stood during our first interview back in February of 2020. Kevin doesn't understand how his family could have missed Kurt's body. They searched this area days before his body was found.
We followed our footprints, Sarah, from the party, and we had the search party standing up there.
Right.
So if there's a kid with a yellow shirt on, you're not going to miss him.
Right.
And if these kids are back here playing, accidentally they come across him. Well, we were looking for him.
I have a copy of Kurt's autopsy report from 1981. In it, the medical examiner found his heart stopped, but didn't find an exact cause of death. He wrote Kurt's cause of death was probable accidental. The medical examiner estimated Kurt died 24 to 36 hours before he was found. Remember, he was missing for 5 days, so that means Kurt may have been alive after the party. What he did after that is still a mystery.
We've always wanted to put the 3 days together. Where was he at for those 3 days? If there's a 3-day window, he didn't necessarily die at that party or from that party. Something else could have happened to him.
Kurt had a blood alcohol concentration of 0.11, meaning he was drunk but not intoxicated enough that alcohol could have killed him. And this report didn't answer much. How exactly did Kurt die? And did someone dump his body just miles away from the party house where he was last seen? Or was it just an accident?
And just said he's dead and we can't explain it. Well, how do you live with that?
Kurt's family learned more over time about some strange occurrences right before Kurt was found dead. One of his friends claimed he saw Kurt and another boy walking nearby the Sova's home 3 days after he went missing. He says Kurt got into a van saying, "Hey, Franco." This friend later told police he didn't realize Kurt was missing at the time, or he would have done something. Also, while Kurt was still missing, a stranger reportedly walked into a record store in Kurt's neighborhood, noticing his missing flyer in the window, according to Unsolved Mysteries. He told the manager she might as well take the flyer down, saying they'll find him dead in 2 days, and no one would know why he died. That later chillingly came true. Then 3 months after Kurt's death, another case stumped investigators. A teenager was found dead just 2.5 miles from where Kurt's body was discovered. 13-year-old Eugene Cavette's body was found in a ravine in Newburgh Heights. Eugene, who reportedly once knew Kurt, had vanished in January 1982. The similarities between the cases are eerie. Both teens were missing for days before eventually being found dead. Eugene and Kurt's bodies were found in ravines, the shoes from each of their right feet missing. But in Eugene's case, there was a cause of death. The autopsy revealed he died from falling into the ravine. But what wasn't answered, was this an accident or could someone have pushed him? Many were quick to link the two teenage deaths. But at the time, in 1981, police didn't investigate Kurt's case, maybe as much as they would have today. And so the years passed by.
It's been 20 years. Everybody had forgot about Kurt.
I'm Sara Goldenberg. You're listening to Dark Side of the Land. Decades passed and Kevin tried to move on the best he could. His dad died and so did his mother, Dorothy. She fought for years to find out what happened to her youngest son. Kevin lost his other brothers over the years too. all of them gone without answers. What happened to Kurt? Leaving Kevin, the last Sova in his immediate family, still alive. But as he went through his family's belongings, Kevin found a box his mother kept with all of her detailed notes investigating her son's case.
She went to her grave never giving up on what happened to Kurt. The only member left. I guess it's my responsibility to do that.
Detailed notes that could help years and years later, because in December of 2019, Kurt's case got another chance.
We have boxes of information.
Newburgh Heights police announced they were reopening the case. They held a press conference committing to finding answers, calling Kurt's death suspicious.
We feel as though there was somebody who was at this party who knew something.
Newburgh Heights Police Chief John Majoy said police at the time didn't believe it was a crime, so they didn't investigate very much. He believed more could be done to solve the case. Police also partnered with Tiffin University students majoring in criminal justice to get fresh eyes on the case.
This is long overdue to find the answers of why Kurt is no longer here.
But that's not all. A few months later, Kevin would wind up in the Windy City.
Well, I want to welcome everybody to Unsolved, Chicago.
Kurt's case file landed in Chicago, where the mystery garnered national attention. I was there as hundreds of true crime fans tried to crack the case at Unsolved.
It's a rare opportunity that the public gets to see any of this information.
Excitement was in the air as they gathered in hopes of finding answers.
It's fascinating because I'm a crime junkie, one of those that always watches, Dateline 48 Hours.
It feels like an inside scoop kind of thing.
Kevin was there too, hoping this could lead to closure down the road.
Just a lot of unanswered questions. Maybe it's time to find out why. Maybe it's time they get solved. I hope.
Good morning. How's all the detectives today?
Newburgh Heights Police Chief John Majoy took a chance, turning to crowdsourcing to solve Kurt's case and opening the case file to 300 citizen detectives. They pored over medical examiner reports, toxicology reports, interviews of witnesses, and photographs of the crime scene. Unusual access to such a big case.
It just goes to show you that this philosophy, this idea of bringing people and let them analyze a case, maybe on a cutting edge of something.
Majoy told me from the start the investigation into Kurt's death was flawed. He had no investigative reports to rely on. They didn't get lost over time, they simply don't exist. Majoy said one of the detectives working Kurt's case was later charged and convicted of prescription fraud and civil rights violations. The chief at the time, he said, was unqualified for the job.
It just wasn't thoroughly and fully investigated back in 1981 like it should have been. And so we figure we can kind of pick up some of the pieces and maybe try to find some resolve and get somewhat closure for this family.
Majoy said reopening the case decades later came down to this.
I think that the key thing is that we felt as though it was solvable. In other words, not that we're going to go to the grand jury and get an indictment, but at least we're going to find out what happened and who did what.
But the challenges were still huge.
The time has not done us justice at all because people, they don't remember. Although it was a very high critical incident, a lot of people, they remember it happening, they remember where they were at. And people want to try to help, but they misremember. They put out some information that may not be altogether accurate. But then you also have the rumor mill going around that that this happened or this happened. And so we said from the get-go that we're going to run wherever direction the case takes us. Whatever road it goes, we're going to go. And whenever a lead comes in, we're going to follow up on it, we're going to quantify it, we're going to rank it and see where it takes us, because that was never done.
For him, partnering with college students and Unsolved was a way to look at the case through a different lens.
Really, we didn't have anything to lose with that, and we thought we had everything to gain, and so far that's proven true.
More resources and experts dug into the case.
When we reached the finish line in this thing, what we can say is that we did everything possible in our power to try to solve this case. That was never done. And it should have been done.
With one goal, to finally solve it.
So this case may not be solved, probably won't be solved at the end of this conference, but do you believe it can be solved?
I think so. I think that every day we're getting one step closer.
When we caught up with Kevin, just as CrowdSolve was starting, he was overwhelmed with emotion.
These people don't even know us. Why do they care about my brother? Murder, accident, whatever it is, we're trying to come up with a resolution. How do you not support that? How do you not encourage that?
He wondered if what happened to his brother was a crime or something nearly just as bad, a cover-up.
Some kid that went to a party, drank too much, and killed himself. What if that's not the case?
And it hasn't been easy to live without answers.
What if they could have got him help and he would still be here? Or what if it was foul play and he was murdered? Maybe it's something that's been right there in front of our face all this time and we just didn't know how to look for it.
Kevin says Kurt's death destroyed his family.
We should know why our loved ones die, even if it's not what we want to hear.
As a news crew covering the case, we weren't allowed into sessions detailing the evidence and suspects from Kurt's case file, or even the theories these citizen detectives came up with. But Chief Majoy later filled us in on some details. Police followed some leads before and after Chicago, focusing on the last people to see Kurt alive at that party.
19 News starts now.
And we have continuing coverage on the coronavirus. Here are the latest numbers.
But then, the COVID-19 pandemic hit just a few weeks after CrowdSolve in March of 2020, slowing police down in the beginning, but not much. They did some interviews on Zoom, but the amount of time that had passed since Kurt's death was also a challenge. Some people moved, went to prison, or even passed away in the decades since he died. Police interviewed Kurt's best friend, asking why he wasn't with Kurt at the party. They spoke to the guy who last saw Kurt there and went back inside to get his coat. Even a woman who was 14 at the time when she dated Kurt. We spoke to Chief Majoy again after we got back from CrowdSolve.
This has been one of the major things that have happened in her life. It was a life-altering event at age 14 for her. And she's not a suspect. She wasn't there. Her name has never come up in part as far as knowing what happened that night because she wasn't with him. And we can prove that she wasn't with him. But she really wants to help us fill in the gaps, but she just can't remember, and she had a sense of frustration in talking to her because she wanted to remember, and she kept apologizing. I'm sorry, I wish I remembered more. But the information that she gave was still very valuable. And so, but this has been a common thread with the number of folks we've talked to, and that is that they want to help, they just don't remember. And so it just brings about one of the many challenges of a 38-year-old case. It would be easy if this case was solvable through technology or science. That would be really easy. But this is not the case. We've said that from the get-go. We're not going to get any evidence from exhuming the body. We're certainly not. There was no cell phones back there during that time, and so there's no cell phone records. There's none of that. There wasn't security cameras on the front of storefronts in 1981. That just didn't exist back then. So it's just all the more harder that this case works. But it makes us want to work all the more harder too, because it involves a lot of just good old-fashioned police work to get this thing done.
Chief Majoy told me they went to Tennessee twice and to Southeast Ohio to interview some people close to the party that night and give them lie detector tests.
We've been across the state. We've been to Southern Ohio, we've been to Eastern Ohio, we've been to a prison to interview people. We've been all over the place. And this case in the last 100 days has gotten more attention than it has in 38 years. And that's a good thing because we're keeping it in the forefront. People are coming forth with information, and each piece of information is critical to this case.
Majoy told us they were able to eliminate one person as a suspect, the guy who last saw Kurt at that party. He passed a polygraph in 1989 and another one in 2021. They ruled him out right before he died of an overdose. Police also spoke with Kurt's friend, who was supposed to meet him out that night at the party, but never did. He passed a polygraph, and Majoy says he had nothing to do with it. Hi, this is Sara Goldenberg. We checked back in with the chief in 2022 for the latest updates on the case.
We basically went and we interviewed everybody that we could possibly interview. We talked to everyone who was willing to talk to us. And so at this point right now, there's really no stone that has not been overturned in the case, which is good.
They also went to Marion Correctional Facility, a low and medium security prison for men an hour north of Columbus. There, police spoke with an inmate about a key person from the party who was mentioned many times, nicknamed Tank. He was the older guy hanging out with a young crowd.
The best way to describe it is take a dry erase board and start, writing names on it and then drawing, lines from name to name to name and who's affiliated with that person's name. While Tank's name was in fact brought up, and again, this is his nickname, we won't use his real name because he was an uncharged suspect, but we were never able to draw a link from Tank into our case. And it sounded like he hung out with these kids. He was a little bit older, about 5 to 7 years older than these guys, had the hot rod car, etc., which is fine, but we could never put him around that night. And so unfortunately, this individual had passed away prior to us even opening the cold case. So there was no opportunity. And we reached out to the family to see if they were willing to talk, but did not receive a response back from them.
In the case of the other teen, Eugene Cavett, that had similarities to Kurt's suspicious death, Majoy said this: there were commonalities between the two deaths, but they were never able to draw a link. As for the man at the record store who warned Kurt would be found dead, and one of Kurt's friends who supposedly saw Kurt get into a van when he was missing, Chief Majoy says those theories have not been dismissed, but they're not substantiated.
An example would be is to put on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being, very low evidentiary value, where 10 being very high evidentiary value. And the Unsolved Mysteries segment brought on an individual who claims to have seen Kurt walking down the street during the time that he was missing and saw him yell, "Hey, Franco," and then get into a van. We actually interviewed this person here as part of our investigation. And what we found was that he had not seen Kurt for at least a year, maybe a year and a half. And we're talking between the ages of 13, 14, 15, 16 in this area. And so people, they change. And so I'm not suggesting that the individual is lying. He probably saw what he saw, but whether it was Kurt or not, on an evidentiary scale, I place it about maybe a 2 or 3, maybe at best, because this Kurt was a kid who had never run away from home, who, like many his age during that time, he drank beer, he drank alcohol, he may have smoked a little marijuana, he skipped school, but it seemed like commonplace amongst a lot of the kids that they hung out with. And for him to just disappear like that, not call, not stop at home, not talk to any friends, but yet they saw him walking down the street on Harvard Avenue, right? He would have been walked right past the police station. His family's out looking for him. And then in terms of the music store, someone coming in and someone saying something to a clerk there, categorize it lower on the scale because, first of all, we were not able to locate nor find this individual who was the recipient of these statements.
Majoy says they even went through spreadsheets of tips called into Unsolved Mysteries decades ago. Many he called outlandish, including claims a satanic cult was involved. That was dismissed by police.
When people go missing and it gets a lot of press, there's people that come out of the woodwork, and there's psychics that claim to have seen things, and there's all kinds of different theories out there.
Majoy also checked with a present-day medical examiner who says he would have ruled Kurt's death undetermined.
And one of the key factors was that we ruled out that stomach content does not help prove time of death. One of the comments that Dr. Gilson made was, don't rule out the fact that he may have died that night, which is very plausible, because why wouldn't someone have seen him? Why wouldn't he have called? Why didn't he reach out to his family or friends or anything like that? But as an opposing point, everybody says that they searched that area. But, that part is perhaps true, but how detailed of a search was it? The police officer who handled the investigation at the time later went to prison for unrelated matters, but their investigation was vague at best.
For those who ask, how was Kurt's body missed in the search, he believes high grass could have hidden it, and there wasn't a very thorough investigation at the time.
But if you look at some of the news reports from back then, they did have some video. We found it to be helpful because there was like high grass in the area. So it's possible that they could have missed him. And so, again, when you quantify things and you look at the scale of things, I don't dispute that they probably drove through there looking for him. But if he's laying down, or he was not quite fully underwater, but in a puddle that he was still partially or not fully submerged, they could have missed him too. And so we haven't ruled that out either.
Still, Majoy believes someone out there knows something, but for now, they've hit a brick wall. And Chief, I know you worked so hard on this case when you reopened it. Is it difficult all this time later to have not quite the answers that you were looking for?
It is difficult, but at the same token, when you're conducting a criminal investigation, not all investigations lead to an arrest or get solved. They just don't. And so as law enforcement, we have to understand that. But at the end of the day, what you have to look at is, did you do everything that you could possibly do to try to solve the case? Yes or no? And if it's no, then go back in and do whatever it is that you need to do. But if it's a yes, then you have to live with that and you have to be able to accept that. And while we have not closed the case out completely, we just don't have any concrete, solid evidence that says that Kurt was murdered. And we weren't looking for that. We were just looking to find out what happened. It is hard not being able to come up with that conclusive answer that you can give to the family, because really that's what they deserve.
Kurt's case is not closed, but police tell me it's definitely cold. We found at this point, unless he sees new evidence, Chief Majoy believes it was most likely an accidental death.
My thinking is on it, based upon everything that we saw, is that there's a greater likelihood than not that Kurt passed away that night, because there's no other evidence that suggests otherwise. And, that's not conclusive. I'm just suggesting that there's a better likelihood than not, because we just don't have anything else that really adds up to solve the case that says, yes, this is in fact what has happened.
So, Kevin, I was just going to start off talking about, just tell us a little
So
bit
now,
about
more
Kurt.
than 2 years after CrowdSolve, the spotlight on the case has faded, and so has Kevin's hope for answers. In October 2021, he spoke to us on a sad but major milestone, 40 years since he lost his brother.
What else do you do if they honestly opened it up and tried? And they did put hours and hours and hours in. They logged on so many miles, and they went to prisons, and they talked to people, and they polygraphed people, and they tried.
Whatever happened that night, Kevin still thinks his brother's life could have been saved by people at that party.
I truly, in my gut, Sarah, think that he died, and they just panicked.
Years later, he thinks of the milestones missed with his youngest brother. Athletic, artistic, always ready with a good laugh.
So there's a side of him that you wish you had gotten to know. What would Kurt have been like when he was older?
Yeah, what would Kurt have been like when he was older? Who knows? Kurt might have been the most talented of all of us.
For now, not knowing is something Kevin will have to get used to living with again.
When you don't have an answer, I don't know. There's a side of me that I think I came to peace with it, not wanting to blame somebody. I didn't really want to have to hold that resentment. But to this day, Sarah, I don't know. I really don't. What do you do? No matter what, it doesn't bring Kurt back.
If you have any information on Kurt's case, you can contact Cuyahoga County Crime Stoppers with anonymous tips at 216-252-7463 or online at 25crime.com. I'm Sara Goldenberg. You're listening to Dark Side of the Land.
Subscribe now for future episodes and find more Dark Side of the Land and photo galleries related to these cases at cleveland19.com.